with a hybrid vehicle, if you can drive it with the battery or by putting gas in, and you have a problem with the battery, is the court going to feel that that is catastrophic to driving and using the vehicle because you do still have the gas alternative? And I've had courts make that argument. Well, they can just put gas in it and everything's peachy, everything's perfect. So has the value really been diminished that much? But then what our clients will say is, well, the reason I purchased the vehicle was to be able to use the battery. So there's really a large discrepancy there between how a consumer feels and how a court might feel.
Welcome back to Lemon Law Unpeeled, the Lemon Law podcast. I'm Emma.
And I'm Courtney.
And I'm Steven.
And today we're going to be talking about electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, how they are treated under lemon law. Are they treated any differently? How those cases are evaluated, and also just talk about our experience with different types of electric vehicles, what we've seen, the good, the bad, all of that. So first, I'll start off just by saying that electric and hybrid vehicles are treated just like any other vehicle on the road when it comes to lemon law or breach of warranty. The standards don't change just because you have an electric car. What does change is just simply depending on what the malfunction is, it can be a more apparent lemon law case than, say, your regular, gas vehicle. From what we've seen so far with electric vehicles, just generally, they're tough. I do feel that if you go out and you buy a purely electric vehicle, not a hybrid, you're taking a risk. I don't know quite how ready we are yet for these vehicles, just because we've seen a lot of issues with them, a lot of issues with the batteries, a lot of recalls associated with the batteries that prevented consumers from being able to park the vehicle in their garage, prevented them from being able to charge past a certain point. And it just seems to be quite an interference, along with seeing, too, that some dealerships, our tech isn't here that deals with those cars today, or things like that make it more difficult to get a diagnosis and get a repair as compared to your just run-of-the-mill, normal gas vehicle. But there are some great advantages to electric vehicles, the gas mileage, the lack of emissions, all of that does come into play as well. A lot of people get tax credits too from purchasing these vehicles. So there's a lot of pros and cons that come with getting a gas or hybrid vehicle. And similarly, so with lemon law, we run into the same, again, pros and cons list when it comes to dealing with an electric or hybrid vehicle in these types of cases. So first, I'd just like to draw a distinction between an electric and a hybrid vehicle, right? Those two are somewhat, treated differently than just a straight electric car.
Yeah, Emma, I think you're exactly right, because with a hybrid vehicle, if you can drive it with the battery or by putting gas in, and you have a problem with the battery, is the court going to feel that that is catastrophic to driving and using the vehicle because you do still have the gas alternative? And I've had courts make that argument. Well, they can just put gas in it and everything's peachy, everything's perfect. So has the value really been diminished that much? But then what our clients will say is, well, the reason I purchased the vehicle was to be able to use the battery. So there's really a large discrepancy there between how a consumer feels and how a court might feel.
I just the other day had that same issue with a client where he said, I bought the vehicle so it would be a hybrid. I don't want to use just gas. I wanted to have the hybrid feature available to me. However, he's chosen not to drive his vehicle, even though he still has the ability to drive it just solely on gas. That does become an issue of whether or not he does have a lemon or not, because he's choosing not to drive because he does not feel it's safe, even though he still has the ability to drive solely on gas.
Right. We still have all the same standards. Just because it's an electric vehicle doesn't decrease the standard or increase it, right? It still stays right where it is, where you have to show a substantial impairment. As Courtney always likes to say, can the vehicle get you from point A to point B? And if it can, and you get there, whether it's via gas or electric, the car is still functioning. The car is still able to be used. That being said, I totally understand buying a hybrid vehicle and then not being able to use the hybrid function. It probably was more expensive, right? My mom, for example, my mom got a Mazda, I think it's a CX-90 hybrid, probably last year. She got a battery installed in her garage, right, for charging. And it's a lot of work and effort. You got to plug it in anywhere we go. Like when we were up at Vermont at my sister's house, she's looking for a plug outside to plug it in. So it's a lot of effort. I get that. And also, they get excited, right? Consumers get excited when they have a hybrid. They want an electric vehicle. They want to be able to use that. So when you can't use it, it kind of defeats the purpose, certainly. But unfortunately, that's not the standard for the law, right? The standard isn't, what did you buy it for? Oh, you can't use it what you bought it for. That's not, unfortunately, the sticking point.
Similarly, I've had a lot of cases where the vehicle charged and it worked, but it didn't charge to full capacity, and sometimes not always just using the home charger or just using a charger at a different location along the road. Sometimes it would charge to full capacity at one of those, but not the other. So then it really becomes a gray area. Well, all right, how much is this impairing the use value safety? You can still use it, you just can't charge it as fully if you're using your home charger, but you can if you're using an outside one, or vice versa. So there's a lot of gray area there.
Yes, there definitely is. And I think that the standard kind of has become, if it's something that causes the vehicle not to start, right? The same as it would a gas vehicle. If it doesn't start, if you can't get more than 30 miles before you have to pull over and charge it, you can't go any further than that, or things of that nature, that would be something that would render the vehicle a lemon. Otherwise, unfortunately, most likely what you're just looking at is a percentage of your purchase price back to compensate you for the fact that that system doesn't work. But I can totally see how a lot of consumers would not be in agreement with that. I had a conversation yesterday, Steve, it might be the same Mazda car that you're referring to, that client that we spoke with who basically was like, listen, I understand that I don't qualify for Lemon Law, right? Because his problem started at like 40,000 miles and he's in New York. So had to be within the 218. He didn't meet the threshold for Lemon Law, but I get it. He was like, but the hybrid function of my car doesn't work. And while I was like, I understand that and I get that, we can't, it's not like when you buy, and I think I gave the example of an ice maker. You buy an ice maker from the store, it doesn't work, you take it back and you return it, right? That's just one-to-one. Unfortunately, the law doesn't do the same thing for cars. It's not a perfect one-to-one where if you buy it and a certain function doesn't work, you just bring your receipt, take it back to the store and you get your money back. Unfortunately, and I think it's just because they're such high-priced items and there's so many of them on the road that they just said, nope. In that sort of a scenario, you're just getting a percentage of your purchase price back, and that's all you're going to get, which, again, I understand the frustration, but unfortunately, it's where we're at and what the law says.
Yeah, and I think especially because there's just so many things that can go wrong, especially as vehicles become more luxurious, there's more bells and whistles, there's just so many things to break. And if you could just bring it back for any little thing, I think they would end up taking more vehicles back than they were selling, so it's just not practical.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Especially, the batteries themselves. It takes a lot to mine for them. It takes a lot to produce them. And I mean, you want to talk about having a zero emission car, but then you look at what it takes to mine the battery. I'm not able to reconcile those two things, but that's just me. But overall, yes, I agree with you that even just the parts can be really difficult to put together to build them, let alone when you need a replacement. So yeah, there's lots of issues that we're up against that you referred that are completely accurate. Some of the most common issues, let's talk about some of the most common issues that we see with these vehicles. I mean, I think the most obvious one is failure to charge, right? It won't charge would be the most common one that we see. What else do you guys see usually?
Yeah, either won't charge or won't charge fully, or won't charge fully when using a certain charger. I had a client recently tell me that it charged fully when she was at the dealership using their charger, but then wouldn't charge fully when she was at her house. So there's a lot of little things that can go wrong with the charging component.
Another situation, which is more extreme, but it's the battery catching on fire while charging. Now, this has been documented pretty recently in a class action against General Motors regarding the 2017 through the 2022 Chevy Bolt, where while charging, there was a potential for the battery to catch on fire. There's also been a lot of videos, probably on social media, that you've seen regarding Teslas and the batteries catching on fire. So that is an extreme situation, but that has been documented as a possibility to happen with these cars.
Yeah, there's a lot of issues. And the charging, I guess, obviously, I think is the most pivotal one. And the fire was an issue too. We did a lot of Chevy Volts where they repurchased the vehicle. What was interesting though, at the end of that, so what was it last year that they issued a software update that could test and see if your battery had the potential to catch fire? And if it didn't, or it did pass some software tests that they did, you no longer had to do any of that. It was very strange how it all ended up. You would think it would be like battery replacements or some change to the actual vehicle, but it ended up being a software issue that they went in and were able to remedy, but many years, many years later. And another issue too, kind of to go back to Courtney's charging issue, because I had a case in New York against Ford that we filed on, because what was happening was the client was bringing the vehicle to the dealership, right? But dealers have superchargers at their dealers, so they have a different way of charging the car than you do at your home. If you're just plugging it into your house, that's a different thing versus at the dealership and using a supercharger. So that was also a point of contention too, because the dealership was saying everything was fine, but it was like, no, but you're not charging it the same way that I'm charging it. Lo and behold, it ultimately came to that the plug that he had a short in it. And it was a plug provided by Ford, so we were able to get the repurchase. And I think just simply because it was so blundered by the dealership, basically, and that it was just a short in the cord. You guys didn't think to check his charging cord to see if maybe that was the issue. You just kept plugging it in at the dealer and being like, everything's fine. But sorry, again, I'm going off on a tangent because that case still bugs me. But we did ultimately get it repurchased, but it was a battle, right? Because the dealership was saying everything was fine. The client was saying it wasn't. Went so far as even having an electrician go to his house to check the voltage on his outlet and things like that to prove that it was not his fault. But all these things kind of come into play. Another common one is just error messages on the dash, like service your hybrid system, but without any failure in driving, which is another gray area, right? It's just like getting your check engine light on, but you can still drive the car. How does that come into play? That's another common one for those sort of error messages. And I also have seen other issues too, where it won't switch into hybrid, right? It just won't make that changeover for them to be able to use that system at all.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we most commonly see it with Ford, GM, occasionally Mazda. I actually had a Ford where the vehicle not only had the risk of catching on fire while parked in the garage, but it actually did catch on fire while parked in the garage. There was damage to the garage. His car was completely totaled. This was a case we ended up having to file a lawsuit on. There was a lengthy deposition, but Ford did end up repurchasing the vehicle, even though there was no vehicle anymore to take back, which I was shocked by. That's not something we generally see. The client also had received some money from the insurance company, and so it still ended up getting money back from Ford, which is rare. But again, the vehicle actually did catch on fire in that case.
And I would say that while your case, you had the fire actually happen, which is helpful to argue, but unfortunate for the consumer, a lot of these cases where they get notices about a potential for the battery to catch on fire, just that potential is not enough always under the law to proceed and say, well, this is a lemon because it has the potential. Unfortunately, more often than not, almost always, you need to have the issue actually happen. It really becomes a tough situation for consumers because they're like, well, why can't I get repurchased? It has this potential. Potential is not enough under the law, unfortunately.
Yet I think that's the same reason why a warning light alone, whether it's saying service the hybrid system or it's a check engine light, it's the same reason why a warning light alone isn't enough to get a repurchase, because we don't know what's wrong. We don't know if anything's wrong. Maybe it's a glitch in the actual sensor itself and the light is just illuminating. So you really have to experience the symptom or some catastrophic event, even though consumers will always say, well, what do they want me to actually get in an accident? And it sounds crazy to say yes, but honestly, yes, they need to actually see the problem, the risk of the problem, even the probability of a problem isn't generally not enough under the law.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it too hinges on which manufacturer you're dealing with, right? Because Steven's absolutely right. We've talked about recalls before and how they do or don't apply to your vehicle, even if you get one in the mail, and that the description of the issue really doesn't count unless you're experiencing, right? Coulda, woulda, shoulda just doesn't fly when it comes to, the law and having to make these legal arguments. But that being said, the Chevy Volt cases, Chevy did buy a lot of those cars back. But I think, again, it's because they're a good manufacturer to deal with, right? We always kind of talk about the pros and cons. Like, for example, Tesla, we don't handle Tesla cases, even though they may have their own issues, and I'm sure that they do have failures to charge and things of that nature too. The manufacturer themselves, their purchase agreement has an arbitration clause in it. And since the dealers that sell these vehicles are not independent contractors, they're not third parties, they are actually part of Tesla, that arbitration clause is binding on the consumer. So we have to go through AAA or some other organization to try to push for the buyback, which not all of them are totally consumer friendly. Some of them are a little bit pro-business, so it can be pretty difficult. So depending on which manufacturer you buy your vehicle from, too, can really dictate how much help you're going to get down the road in terms of when you're having issues, how are they going to handle it? I would say Chevy's really good. VW is another one that's good. Mazda can be, right? I feel like Mazda can be a little fickle, but they're pretty decent to deal with. And Ford is good, right? Ford, yes, we talked about 2 lawsuits we had to file, but most of those, I think, were kind of unique situations that we had. Most of the time, Ford, we can deal with pretty easily as compared to, say, like Tesla or Toyota or Hyundai. They can be much more difficult to deal with when you're having issues.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Not only more difficult, but just drag it out and take such a long time as opposed to some of the others that we mentioned.
Yeah, Chrysler cases, my God. They're taking like 4 months at this point to come to a resolution. And that's really difficult, especially for clients with like the Chrysler Pacifica. That's a big one. That's an electric van that you can get that a lot of families use, right? And any issues with that, with the charging system, with the batteries, those vehicles will sit out of service for months at a time. And Chrysler will take absolutely forever to turn around and repurchase. And I think part of it is because they're waiting to see, can we get this fixed? Can we fix this, get it back on the road? Because we know just as well as, the other side does, how long litigation will take. And if we can get it repaired, we can lessen our exposure and not have to buy it back, which can be, really frustrating for both sides. But on this, the other side of the same coin, we settle a lot with Chrysler, right? We very rarely have to file lawsuits against them. So when I kind of tell clients, listen, it's a 4-month process now or a 1 to 2 year process, in the alternative, it doesn't, seem so bad.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. I have that conversation all the time. Well, let's give them a few more weeks or several more weeks because that still beats filing a lawsuit and being in this thing for the next year and a half.
Yeah. So part of what you can do as a hybrid owner is kind of the same that we always talk about, right? If the dealership is telling you that they can't confirm your issue, do your best to record it, take photos, do your best to prove that, hey, I'm charging it. I know a lot of these vehicles have an app that you can use that shows the charging. That was part of that Ford case I talked about in New York, was that not only was it not charging, but it was taking forever even just to charge the battery a little bit. And fortunately, he had a charging log in his phone that showed that it would charge for like 24 hours straight and that it was actively charging. It just wasn't going anywhere. And we still had the Moroni sticker or the window sticker from when he bought the car that says full charge in 8 hours. So that was part of the case too, is being able to show, listen, it's been 24 and we're still at, 15% battery as compared to what you had said it would take. So documenting your problems, videos, photos, making sure when you get that repair order, you read it. It says everything it's supposed to say. And if it doesn't, you have to have that conversation with the dealership to see what you can get in writing stating, the issues that they did or, did not see or what you were able to show them. The documentation remains the same with these cases. And it's all about, what can you prove?
Yeah, absolutely. For the most part, in general, the hybrid vehicles are the same as any other vehicle. You have to have the repair invoices and the repair attempts to back it up. And it has to be a vehicle that, as Emma said, I like to say, but it's true, literally is not driving from point A to point B.
Yeah, it's all stuff to take into consideration. And when you're starting to have issues with your vehicle, you have to be proactive, right? Kind of like what Stephen was saying with his client too, that's like, I'm just not going to drive my car. While that helps in the sense of showing low miles, if we ultimately have to be able to show that you truly don't believe in the safety of the vehicle, that sort of stuff only counts so much for your case as opposed to being a little bit more proactive in the sense of bringing it back to the dealer, documenting your issues and getting those repair orders and keeping them fresh, as I like to say. For a recurring issue, you don't have to go back every week, but every 2-3 months, if you can show that the issue's still ongoing, super helpful to the case rather than being like, I've been there enough times. I've done enough. I think that this is good. It's never this is good, right? There's always more that you can do. There's always more that you can document. Every little bit helps, as frustrating as it is. And of course, like we talked about too previously, You always have a lot of online forums available for you as well of what other consumers have done. You have the Better Business Bureau that has tons of lemon law information per state that you can review. Your state's attorney general's office would have a lot of information as well. Because when you're dealing with all these issues, you also want to take into account the timing, right? And for example, in Georgia, right, you have to send that notice to them, that final repair attempt notice within a certain time frame. So again, you can't just sit back and kind of let things happen to you. You have to be proactive and see, okay, what are the requirements of my state? So let's say you're in Georgia, I'm about to hit 24,000 miles on my car. Should I be doing something within this time frame? All things you need to look at and take into consideration, along with calling, our intake staff at 833-4-CAR-LAW. Always have tons of information. Happy to discuss your case with you in terms of whether it's ready or what more you may need to move forward. And with that, we want to thank you for listening today, and we'll see you next time.
Lemon Law Unpeeled is for informative purposes only. It is not to take the place of legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship between the viewers and Robison Lemon Law Group. Individual results also may vary as outcomes are determined on a case-by-case basis.